This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid-state, turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Jimmy Burroughes on the show. He has spent over 20 years in the British military as an officer, leading people. He has a track record of success. He's also a fellow MBA, which is awesome. And we're going to talk about how to coach people, how to become better leaders, how to deal with burnout, lots of other cool stuff. Anyway, with all that being said, Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, John. So great to be here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background, how you got into, first, how you got into military service, how did that transition into helping leaders outside of the military?
Yeah, good question. So if I rewind the clock, 20-something years, I was finishing up at university, and I guess I was struggling for what is the career I'm going to do that's going to help me make a difference. And I think that's, a pillar of my life that I've always had is how do I make a difference to help people or to help people perform. And I'd been an Army cadet, and I'd been in the what you would call the ROTC at university, and I really enjoyed it, and I was pretty good at it. And so I thought, well, there's a track through leadership in the military that allows you to make a difference to people, whether it's making a difference to the soldiers that you're leading in battle, or whether it makes a difference to the people you're protecting back at home and the families and freedom that you can support by going out there into those parts of the world that perhaps other people don't want to go to and making a difference to them. Also, what I saw increasingly was that at that time there wasn't a lot going on in the world militaristically other than a drawdown in the Balkans and some hearts and minds and humanitarian work, peacekeeping work that was happening in Cyprus. So I thought, well, I'll join up and I'll learn my craft and learn my trade as a leadership person and see where it takes me. Fast forward 12 months and I was finishing Sandhurst, which is the equivalent of West Point, and a strange thing called Gulf War II kicked off. And really that was into the fire in terms of leadership development. So within about a week and a half of finishing and graduating all of my leadership training through Sandhurst and then logistic training, which is what I specialized in, I was in Basra having caught a commercial flight to Kuwait, hitchhiked up to Basra airfield, and was essentially responsible for supporting the logistic resupply to the fighting troops in the center of Basra and its surrounding area. So it was a real baptism of fire. And I'm sure you can imagine, as a young 20-something-year-old, 23-year-old, I think I was at the time, a lot of responsibility to take on and learn, literally, baptism of fire on how does this leadership thing work under high pressure, under high stress, and when the stakes are pretty high. And it's probably a message that has stuck with me through most of my career, has been anybody can be a leader when it's easy. It's when it becomes challenging that real leaders start to emerge. And so equipping yourself with the skills and techniques and ability to lead when it's tough is really important.
Yeah. So, how do you have any stories or anything that you can relate to that happened when you're out on the battlefield that you've been able to bring into the corporate world and transform and use that as a teaching point or a lesson to help coach young leaders or people that are new into management or new into leading people that really kind of hits home?
Yeah, I think probably the best example I can give you is when I turned up. I'd been through all the leadership training that you could possibly imagine, 50 odd weeks of, or probably more than that, 50 to 60 weeks of leadership training, intensive leadership training. And so you kind of, you pop out of the course and you believe that you are ready to lead. And when you're going through that training, there is an emphasis on the responsibility of you to be the leader. And it's like being that newly promoted manager who suddenly has responsibility for a team and you have to go manage them. That doesn't mean that you have to have all the answers and you're expected to be the expert, or that you're expected to be the one saying, follow me, and everybody is going to naturally believe that you have all the answers and the best plan. What it does mean is that you are responsible for the decision making. And so there was a great example where I turned up in Basra and I was planning an operation for a logistic activity, which was essentially setting up internet shopping in the desert where people would drive through, collect their order. It's probably before, the internet shopping age became alive. This is all done by fax machines and telex machines. And I'd planned this operation and I was quite proud of it. And one of my senior soldiers took me aside and basically said, "Sir, with all due respect, you don't have a clue. What I recommend we do is this." And it was under, good advisement that I listened to him and took that on board and changed the plan. And I think that was a really great lesson to learn within the first few weeks of being in theatre, that as a leader, you might believe that you're responsible for planning and organizing and having all of the ideas and all of the answers, but you're not. There are some really experienced people in your team, whether they've been around for a long time, whether they've done the job before, or whether they've just been there longer than you. And your job is to go and tap into that expertise and pull it from them and create a melting pot of ideas and inputs that you then are responsible for deciding what we're going to do and then briefing really clearly so everybody understands what's happening.
Yeah. So was this person like an enlisted person that was underneath your command?
Yeah. So he essentially, he was in the British military, it's called a staff sergeant, but essentially he was a 15-year-ish veteran of multiple operations and had a lot more experience than me, but he still reported to me. But he was, he had much more experience and capability in his area of expertise, which was logistics, than I did.
Yeah. So I had a Navy SEAL on the show a couple of years ago now, Coach Havlick, John Havlick, and he was telling me that one of his most important things that he's learned as being an officer in the military was to have a good master chief, have a good person underneath you that will tell you when you're doing things wrong, tell you when you don't have a clue, like you just said, and you need to learn to listen to those people. Those are the people that you have to have a little humility and understand that they know more than you do and follow back on it. And the other example he gave me is like, if you're managing a group of people, maybe a group of software developers or IT engineers, you can't be a specialist in every one of those functions. You need to have a really good, let's say, a database developer that can tell you kind of the ins and outs of the way we need to do this thing. You need to trust and respect that person and fall back on that person's ability. And as a good leader, you know where your limitations are and how to follow that.
Exactly that. And I think one of the things that keeps coming up when I work with senior leaders now is, they've had an illustrious career of some area of expertise or technical proficiency that has allowed them to get promoted over time. So let's use an example of the IT programmer. Maybe they were really, really good in programming and they became the programming manager and then the head of programming and now the GM or the chief, the CIO. But that doesn't mean when there's a programming problem, they should be rolling their sleeves up. The analogy that we use is a great leader creates leaders who create leaders. And so your job as a leader is to act as an information conduit from the executive leadership team to the level below you, or the level above you to the level below you, essentially, and vice versa, the level below back to the level above. You're the bridge of information, and to tap into the talents of those around you. And so, yeah, exactly that. Just because you were an expert programmer 10, 15 years ago does not mean you should be rolling your sleeves up now. It's that who is the best person to solve this problem? How can I seek their input? How can I get some guidance and expertise from the subject matter expert now, and then use that information to make a better decision? And the key piece here is, how do I make good decisions based on the information I've got, or find more information to make a better decision?
So, what is the thing that holds people back from doing that? Because there's a lot of leaders that are very hesitant to ask for that advice or that, recommendation from the people that report to them. Why is that?
That's a fascinating question. We could go on for hours. If I keep it nice and simple, the premise initially is normally related to ego. So you got promoted because you were good at doing X. And therefore, every time you do X well, you get accolades and recognition and praise, and it makes you feel good, right? So you want to do more of that. When you transition to a leadership role, you have to essentially relinquish some of that gratification and praise that your brain has learned to rely on. And what we're talking about here is a dopamine hit of happiness. I did something well and I got praise for it. We have to let go of that addiction and trade it for, oh, somebody in my team is getting the praise for this now because they did a great job, or I'm the one doing the praising, but I didn't deliver that result necessarily. And so that can be a real challenge for people. And often what we see with leaders who are newly promoted or moving from manager to leader, or leader to leader of leaders, or leader of leader to executive, is they like to keep doing the thing they were good at, or that made them famous, or that they feel comfortable doing, versus transitioning to that next layer of leadership and going, so what are my responsibilities now? And how does that differ from what I did before? And so that can often come because they don't have the transition period or the onboarding period that they need and the support that they need to transition. So they're going to fall back to the old habits because that's where they're getting the praise from, versus actually going, well, what are your expectations of me now? And what does good look like for a leader at this level? And have I had a discussion about that with a coach or a mentor or my leader in the business to help me transition? So there's two things. There's the ego, letting go of the ego, and also the clarity on what is expected of me now versus what was expected of me before.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I know when I can think back to when I was a new manager, I was promoted from being a software developer to managing a software development team. And I wanted to go back to coding. I wanted to code. That's what I was comfortable with. That's what I was good at. And when I wasn't good at something, like I wasn't good at one-on-ones, I wasn't good at, managing a project and things like that. So I struggled with those areas. So I would try to defer doing them and do the thing that I was good at because I felt it made me feel better. It wasn't necessarily what I was asked to do, but it made me feel better. So I did that. And luckily I had a good mentor early on in my career that kind of, called me on the things that I was doing wrong and told me, hey, you really suck at these other things. You need to work on this. Or you don't scale as being a leader of developers, you don't scale by doing the development. You need to let your team do that and let go of that part and move on to something that's more strategic. And I think that was one of the things that having someone to call me out on it was really important.
Exactly that. And, as you move up through the organization, so as you transition to more and more senior levels of leadership, the number of things that you could do increases exponentially. Mm-hmm. And the complexity and ambiguity of the things that you might get involved in is inordinately magnified. And so the key skill comes from prioritization and deciding this is the thing I'm going to spend my time on versus empower or delegate somebody in my team to work on, because this is the thing that is uniquely my responsibility versus there's somebody else who could probably solve this problem and they're probably better at solving it than me. Therefore, I'm going to give it to them. What we tend to do is go, as you say, I want to do the things that make me feel good because I get recognition and praise for those, and they're not necessarily moving us forward.
Yeah. And another thing, like if you do get promoted in a certain area, like you said earlier on, you got promoted because you were good at doing that thing, right? But now you're no longer responsible for that thing. You're responsible for something else. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the struggles, at least that I had, was that I felt like I was better at doing that thing than the other people reporting to me. So, but instead of letting them grow and learn and do those things, I felt like I could just jump in because I do it better, and that was an ego, partly ego, but, also not understanding what my new role should be.
Exactly that. And it comes back to that point, right? It's the ego and the clarity piece. Letting go of the thing that I like doing or makes me famous, and the clarity of what is my new role and have I discussed that with someone. The other question I often ask leaders, and I can ask you, John, is if we sort of sit around the concept of what are you responsible for, it's how did you learn when you were progressing through the junior stages of your career? What were the opportunities, or what were the things that your boss allowed you to do so you could get where you are now? And normally it's a series of experiments and grazed knees and lessons learned, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of it's, experience, fire by trial.
Like exactly that.
Or trial by fire. I got that backwards, but yeah.
Yeah, I got it. And so when you're a leader, that it also becomes part of the job, is to encourage and experiment and have your team explore and get curious about grazing their knees and trial by fire for them, because they're the next generation. And I mentioned it earlier, a great leader is a leader who grows leaders who grows leaders. Well, we need to start that. We need to start that paying it forward by letting our people who are behind us make the mistakes and learn the lessons that we made. And our job is to keep them on track, provide some safety rails. And if they fall over and they do graze their knees, pick them up, dust them off, encourage them to try again, just like you would with your kid when they're learning to ride a bike, and encourage them to keep trying because they'll get it. They just need to keep doing it.
So, like, if we're going to be tactical about this and really come up with some things that we can implement today as a leader, how can we provide those safety rails and give people the opportunity without, putting our business at risk? What are some ways that we can kind of, safeguard the employees to get them to do that?
That's such a great question. And, the one thing that I think leaders can do well that uncovers a lot of these lesson learned activities before we get into business risk is a good coaching conversation. And that might look like, hey, boss, I'm thinking about doing this crazy thing. What do you think? And for the manager to say, okay, well, let's walk that through. Let's play it through end to end. And obviously you may have made those mistakes or your experience can see a glaring hole, but your job as the leader is not to shoot them down. It's to help them see where they might trip themselves up. So let's walk that through. And what have you considered? And how did you get to that point? And what were the things that you disregarded along the way? And can you see any risks here? Is there anything that might trip you up? And you ask a series of coaching questions, which ideally the person goes, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. Or, oh yeah, I hadn't considered that piece. So that might change my plan. And then if they get to the end of that conversation and they're still absolutely committed to it, if you see there is a fundamental business risk that's going to cause a catastrophe, then maybe point that out and say, hey, look, I see this being a potential risk. Do you want to go away and think about how we can avoid that? Or if it's something that's what I would deem controllable risk or acceptable risk, where you say, hey, look, this is probably going to chew up a couple of days of your time, but it's not the end of the world, and this is a good lesson for you to learn, then encourage them to go, hey, why don't you go try that? Work on it for a couple of days, see what happens, come back to me, let me know how you're getting on. I'm interested to see how you progress. And let them just move through it, and then check in with them and see, after those couple of days, what are you seeing so far? And they might go, oh, look, I started it and I realized this, or I've done it and it didn't work out how I wanted. And then you can go through a debrief process. And we provide in the partnership, when we do programs with organizations, we provide both that coaching format and also what we call the lessons learned format, which is like an after action review for how did it go and what did you learn and what are you going to do better next time?
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I know one similar example, from a technical side, I had a really good boss. Shout out to Greg Donnelly if he's listening. When we were like talking about ways to do things from a software development or architecture, impact, he would do that same kind of thing where instead of like spending time and energy coding it and actually implementing it, he would say, let's do what we call a conference room pilot. Let's write it down on paper and let's run it around the table. Let's like if you're going to build something, let's pretend like each chair is a different system that the thing is going to. And let's find out where the holes are. Let's find out where the gaps are by manually moving things and having what we call the human API instead of programmatically doing it, and see where the problems are. And I think it's very, very similar to your approach of talking it through and asking the questions and letting the person kind of run with it. Another thing we implemented many years ago on my team was back at my last job was something called 20% time, where we would give everybody basically one day a week where they could kind of work on whatever they wanted to. And we scheduled that. I had a team of 5 developers, and we would schedule it like whatever, one day a week. You can work on anything you want that's not related to a project that we're currently working on. And it gave them the opportunity to start something from scratch, go get the approvals necessary from the business, gather their own requirements, build something, and kind of learn the whole process and fall on their face sometimes, but also sometimes some good things came out of it.
Absolutely. And this is I think one of the things where certainly in risk averse organizations, we see them limiting their own upside potential because there's always this fear of, well, what if it goes wrong? And so everybody's living in fear of, well, what if it goes wrong? And as a leader, we only have the benefit of our own experience, or maybe our coach's experience or our mentor's experience who we're checking in with. But essentially, we're relying on our own toolkit to support the growth of our own team. And so then one of our team comes to us with a crazy, zany idea, and we're like, well, what if it goes wrong? We can't do that. It's too risky. And so the challenge to that is, but what if it goes right?
Yes.
And what if they uncover something that you haven't seen or you haven't done, or that maybe is an innovation opportunity that none of us have even thought of? We need to allow those things to work through. So just because you can see that it might not work, it's steering them to a place where something might work, and let's go explore that. And I think you're exactly right. That maybe it's that 20% over the week is spent on innovation opportunities or being curious. Or it could just be, hey, we take 24 hours once a month, which is 1 in 20 days, and we just do a crazy creative day. Let's work on something crazy and see what comes up, because what if it goes right?
Yeah, and one example of that I love to talk about. I worked for an internet service provider many years ago, and our marketing group was trying to do a push to get people to go paperless and things like that. They were kind of sending out stuff, but they were very cautious about who they sent the marketing material to, because one of our customers was also a pay per view, and they were a really big customer. So we were kind of cautious about making sure that bills that went to them didn't have that flag on there saying, hey, why don't you go paperless, because we didn't want to impact that relationship. So one of the things that somebody on my team, we managed, we were the developers for the website and online bill pay and things like that. They created something that when you logged in to pay your account, if you were not already paperless, it would just pop up a simple box that says, would you like to go green and get your bills delivered digitally?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no? And this was, 15 years ago, maybe longer. And, our PR group was like, oh, we can't do that, because what if one of those people logged in and, they were offended? Who cares? Quite frankly, and so we implemented it. And what we noticed is within the first year, we saved about $80,000 in printing and billing costs just off that one change. And that was reoccurring revenue that's going to be, our savings that's going to happen every year, month after month. And they're all people that were already going onto our website. They were already logging in. And it was just an initiative that, we didn't have to say the word paper. We didn't have to talk about that at all. We just talked about, would you like to go green and get a digital format of your bill? That was it. And, it's one of those things that we were getting so much pushback from the PR group. But once we went ahead and did it and implemented it, it was just, this is what could go right, showing you that risk averse versus, what could go right.
Absolutely. And I love your example, because there's so many best practices that were, I don't know if they were deliberately or accidentally covered, but really interesting processes around, we can't please everybody here.
Right.
So let's do something and be brave. And surprise, surprise, the majority probably get on board with it. It reminds me of one of the methodologies we use in facilitating workshops, which is essentially to build the opposite of success. So when we're trying to innovate, and sometimes we can be a little bit mentally constrained by, we don't really know what great looks like. So what you do is you design terrible. The terrible customer experience, the terrible process in the software, the worst possible outcomes for a one-to-one meeting. And then you go, cool, so now we've worked out how do we create terrible. We just do a 180 flip on each of those, and that gives us the stuff that we need to watch out for to make it good.
I love that. I've never even thought about designing terrible.
Design for terrible and flip it 180. Because then you start to uncover the things that it's much easier in a way, because you almost create a playfulness in design terrible, because people start to get a bit flippant and jokey about it. But then they start to bring up the things that you might not have thought of when you were trying to design good.
Yeah, I love that, because I can already see in my head, one of the things that we hate is pop-ups, right? So, but what do all websites do? They have a little pop-up box, would you like to sign up to our newsletter? Would you, accept my cookie consent, or whatever it's going to be? There's always a pop-up somewhere, and we all hate pop-ups. But if we design for that and then flipped it 180, we'd come up with maybe a more intuitive way to put those pieces in there.
Exactly.
No, I think that's great. So when it comes to, being this new leader and going through all these changes, we've kind of talked a little bit about the ways to, kind of put the ego behind us a little bit and try to find out what great looks like. Another thing that happens to us all is we get burned out at some point or another. And you wrote a book about beating burnout. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, burnout is getting a lot of press at the moment for I think it's the new de rigueur syndrome that people can have. It used to be imposter syndrome, and then it was, I'm so stressed out, I'm so overworked, and being busy is a badge of honor, and burnout's the new thing. And I think it's probably worth clarifying what is burnout versus being stressed out or tired out or worn out, because often people get misdiagnosed themselves with what burnout is. And if I paint a picture for you of me back in 2017 when I started this body of work, I was a GM running a reasonably large P&L with a team of people, traveling globally, in meetings 7 till 7 every day, working through till 1, 2 in the morning, doing an MBA on top of that. It was very intense lifestyle. And I woke up one morning and I literally felt like I was trapped in quicksand, and my brain was sort of in mental treacle. I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't function. I couldn't make a decision. I was emotionally bereft. There was nothing left. It was like being a zombie. I had no real motivation to go to work or to do anything, to even get out of bed. So it was like an extreme depression. All I could see was the negatives, very, very down on everything in life. And all of the people that I could lean on had either left the business that I was working in due to the dysfunctionality of the organization that we were part of, or had burned out themselves, so were on medical leave or stress leave. And so there wasn't really anybody to sort of lean on for any support. And the organization that we were working in at the time was curtailing or stifling any innovation. And even when we had a significant event which essentially destroyed half of our P&L overnight through a legislative change, that we were then told, well, you all need to fix it, but don't do anything risky or innovative. Just work harder on the things you're doing. So there was no creativity opportunity. And over the 2.5 years I worked in that business, I never took a day of leave. So even when I was visiting family over in the UK, I was living in New Zealand at the time, I was working through the night and then with my family during the day, because there was never an opportunity to switch off. Mm-hmm. And so when you get to that point where you just can't see the wood for the trees, you've just got no energy, there's no drive, there's no passion left, there's nothing left in the tank. That's what burnout looks like. And it was a pretty miserable place to be. It took me about 6 months to come back from that, through essentially a lot of sleep, a lot of therapy, a lot of deep self-work. And what I realized as I was going through that recovery journey and subsequently is I wasn't alone. And a lot of people were really struggling with this. And as I say, we're talking pre-COVID, this is 2017. So since COVID, obviously a lot more people are really starting to notice this. And so what I did was essentially factorize or systemize the elements or the variables that I discovered were causing the burnout, and put a playbook together, which was, if you've got this one, here's how to understand it, and here's how to get back from it. So you can build a high performance culture in your team, and you can be a high performance leader. So the book identifies 5 variables, and those 5 variables are purpose, abundance, connection, exploration, and downtime. And essentially we unpack each one in the book. We tell stories about real life examples of where those things were present or not. And then in each chapter, we have a series of action tips, which are like the recipe for achieving a great result in that element or that variable in the book.
Awesome. So one of the things that I've kind of, tried to implement a lot in my life, my career, is purpose, and talking about purpose. Yeah. How does purpose help you, beat burnout whenever you're feeling like you don't have any more to give?
Purpose is quite a complicated concept, and it took a lot of work to almost common sensify it so people could get it. And what we created was a framework called the Purpose Pyramid. And the reason we split it into the 4 levels of the pyramid is that purpose applies differently at different levels. So for most of us, when I ask the question, why were you put on this planet? People find that quite a tough question to answer, and they often struggle to get clarity on, why am I here? And when we have a very clear personal purpose, it allows us to be more resilient, more focused, and make clearer decisions. So instead, and we talked earlier about that, you could do lots of things. What's the thing you are going to do? Well, when you're really clear on the purpose of why you're here, then you start to make different choices. Also, when you are feeling like you're just on the hamster wheel, there's no point to what I'm doing. I don't really see the point of my effort. No matter how hard I try, it's not making any difference. When you're working to purpose, you are making a difference because you're working towards something. It's that, that the top of the mountain that you're aiming for, or the gold medal that you're striving for, or the whatever it is that you're going for is the purpose. It's the big why. And it's the thing that allows you to get out of bed in the morning. And your purpose can change over time. It can become, it can adapt, it can evolve. But I often recommend people start with finding their personal purpose. And there's a whole lot of detail in the book around how do you achieve that. The next layer of the purpose pyramid is, what's the purpose of your role? And how does your personal purpose line up with that? Because often, again, what we find is people go to work because they have to pay their mortgage or their rent or feed their kids, and there's no real purpose to what they do. So what's the difference you're trying to make in your role? What's the purpose of your role existing? What's the contribution of your role to the team? And when you clearly understand that, again, it's much easier to make good decisions and not get involved in things that maybe don't apply to you. And going back to that first example we talked about, John, your role, your purpose as a leader of the team is different to your purpose as a coder in the team. Yeah. So getting clear on that is really important. Third layer is, what's the purpose of this team? And do I align with that? Does that appeal to my values? Does that work for me? And are we doing something meaningful, or are we just playing whack-a-mole as a team? What we also find is, when we work with large organizations, or any organization, in fact, is when you ask everybody, do you know the purpose of this team? They all nod their heads and say yes. And then you say, well, write it down for me and let's take a look at what you say. And you get those 20 or 30 answers on Post-it notes on a flip chart, and they're all really different. And then you go, oh, okay, so we all believe this team is here to do something else, and we're making our priority decisions and our resource allocations and our funding commitments are based on what we personally believe versus what we all believe. And the analogy I use is, it's like putting us all in a rowing boat and everybody rowing in a different direction as hard as they can. We're all putting lots of effort in, we're all working really hard, but the boat's not going anywhere. And that happens so often. And then the final layer of the pyramid is the organizational purpose. And this is becoming especially relevant for newer generations coming into the workforce. What is the purpose of this organization? Is it doing something? Has it got values? Has it got, is it making a difference? Is it sustainable? Is it, does it have a good corporate social responsibility strategy? What's the purpose of it being here? Is it making a good difference in the world or a bad difference in the world? Because that's important to people. So this concept of purpose is multi-layered, and we break it down as those 4 simple layers to make it easy to get your head around. But it requires a bit of work. But the big thing, to go back to your question, is it gives you that why and that beacon of light to aim for, so you can become focused on something and committed to it.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. I think having that why and understanding, and I think purpose is one of those things you need to talk about with your team. You mentioned that your team's going to have different ideas of what their purpose is. It's really good to talk about that and try to understand it. And even, like you said, purpose will change. And based on projects, I remember we were talking about it with my team several years ago, back that same team I was talking about, where we had, we were writing code for an internet service provider and talking about things. And one of the projects we were working on was writing an app on for the people that were the cable guys that were out in the, driving the trucks and trying to solve people's problems. And we wanted to make a way to really quickly close tickets at the end of the shift so they could, get done with their day. And we were talking about it and what is the purpose of this? And, is it to, speed up the process so we don't have to pay them as much, what is, to make it more efficient? And I was like, well, let's think about the person that's actually doing this. Could it be that our purpose is to get the guy home earlier so he can spend more time with his family? Maybe it'll save him an extra 10 minutes every day so he can leave, and get home and kick the soccer ball. Because these are things that the guys do after they drop off their truck. At the end of the day, right before they check out. If we can give them an extra 10 minutes, they're not, going through all these things manually, but we can automate the process. They can get home and they could have dinner a little bit sooner. Maybe they could play soccer with their kids a little bit sooner. Whatever it is, we're giving them a little bit more time at home, and that maybe is our purpose. Not just to save the company some dollars, but also to get the person home.
Completely agree. You remind me of a sales team I worked with in a large pharma business, and they we did the purpose activity with their team. And when we said to everybody, you clear on the purpose of the team, and there were lots of nodding heads and vigorous agreement that yes, we were all very clear. So we said, well, let's write it down. And we looked at the answers, and they were very divergent. They were as varied as we are here to build relationships. We're here to make money. We're here to try and improve the margin for the business. We're here to get more product into the hands of our customers. And they're probably all correct, but they weren't aligned. And so when they go through this activity, they actually realize that their purpose as a team is to essentially be the conduit for the product from their business into people who need it. And that really shifted how they went about their business, because it became partially about relationships, but first of all, it was around identification of needs, and their entire sales process changed to that. It wasn't about margin and profit. It was about fulfilling need and being of service. So they really shifted all of their energetic focus and all of the way they went about their business. And they experienced double-digit growth year on year because of that shift, because they all suddenly got clear on, well, I'm not trying to squeeze more profit, or I'm not trying to make revenue, or I'm not trying to just force things into customers, or I'm not all about relationships. We're actually about slowing down and being of service and identifying needs and fulfilling needs. And it makes a big difference. And it's just one example, but I think it's really powerful to go through that activity with your team.
Yeah, I agree. I think when you look at it that way, you find out that profits and revenue are really byproducts of fulfilling your purpose. They're the outcomes.
Yes.
No, I think this is really good. I love talking to you about this. One of the things that I would like to do is give you an opportunity to let people know how they can connect with you online and learn more about this, listen to how they can find your podcast, pick up a copy of your book, and maybe if they need help coaching, how can they connect with you?
Perfect. Thank you so much. The best place to reach out to me is jimmyburroughes.com. Burroughes, Burroughes. It's a funny spelling. And in there, you can see the book that we're sharing. We talked about a little bit about today. There's the podcast, which is The Ways of Working Podcast. It's on all major platforms. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn under Jimmy Burroughes. I guess if anybody is interested in a conversation, we always say, well, let's just start with a chat, and we will add as much value in that chat as we possibly can. So whether we end up working together or not, we're going to give you a little bit of clarity, a little bit of support, and point you in the right direction. If that ends up with us working together, fantastic. We tend to partner with larger organizations, so sort of 5,000 people plus. But equally, we do have some smaller clients, and there's some specialists in my team who are experts in that small to medium business space. So depending on your need, if we think we can help, we'll absolutely offer that.
Awesome. And I'll link that up in the show notes too. I just connected with you on LinkedIn as well. And I'll link up your podcast and your website and everywhere else to connect with you. Jimmy, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate having you on.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and some great questions. Really stimulated my thinking today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.